Your tongue is touching the roof of your mouth right now. It's resting there, a soft, wet muscle against a bony palate. A position so automatic you've never once had to think about it. And right now, without moving it, you are holding inside your head an entire library of sentences. You could, in the next second, choose to shape your breath into a sound that carries a specific, intricate thought from inside your skull directly into the mind of another person. You take that miracle for granted every single day. But for over 99% of human history, that was impossible. For millions of years, our ancestors lived in a world of profound and utter silence. Not the silence of a quiet room, but the silence of a mind that could not be shared. A world where no one could say I'm scared, or follow me, or I love you. A world where a warning, a plan, a story, a name, died in the throat that formed it. If the first human who ever managed to speak a single, clear word had failed, you would not be here to read this. Language is the single most important survival tool our species ever invented. And we have absolutely no idea when, or how, it began. We know they had the breath. We know they had the throats. We know their brains were growing, complexity sparking behind their eyes. But the moment it all connected, the moment a sound ceased to be just a noise and became a word, a container for meaning shared between two minds, that moment left no fossil. It is the ghost in our family tree, the silent scream in our bones. And for over a century, scientists have been trying to listen for its echo. The quest starts not with a shout, but with a whisper of anatomy. To speak, you need the right hardware. Your voice box, your larynx, is a tiny box of cartilage in your throat. When you talk, you force air from your lungs, past two tight membranes, your vocal cords, making them vibrate. That buzz is then shaped by your tongue, your lips, your soft palate, sculpting it into the vowels and consonants that form words. In most mammals, that larynx sits high up in the throat. It's a brilliant design for one thing: breathing while swallowing. A chimpanzee can drink and breathe at the same time without choking. But that high position means the vocal tract is short and simple. It can make grunts, hoots, screams, a rich emotional vocabulary, but it physically cannot produce the full range of sounds, like the ee in sea, or the oo in food, that form the building blocks of complex speech. At some point in our lineage, the larynx descended. It dropped lower into the neck. This created a longer, more flexible vocal tract, a bigger resonator. It unlocked the possibility of a wider palette of sounds. But it came with a terrifying evolutionary trade-off. It made us the only mammal that can easily choke to death on our food. We literally risked suffocation for the chance to speak. So when did that dangerous descent happen? For decades, the clue hunters turned to the only evidence that could possibly show it: skeletal remains. The larynx itself is soft tissue. It rots away, but its position influences the shape of the bones at the base of the skull. In the 1970s, researchers studying a famously complete Homo erectus skeleton known as Nariokotome boy, a teenager who died about 1.5 million years ago near what is now Kenya, made a cast of the space where his throat would have been. Based on the bones, they concluded his larynx was high, like an ape's. The announcement was definitive. Speech, they said, could not have begun until much later, perhaps only with our own species, Homo sapiens. A mere couple 100,000 years ago, the case seemed closed. Language was a recent fireworks display, the final flourish of a modern brain. But a single skeleton is not a species, and science, when it listens more closely, often hears a different story. Fast forward a few decades, to a lab where researchers are now studying not just bones, but the whispers of genes. There's a gene called FOXP2. It's sometimes called the language gene, which is an oversimplification, but it's a vital piece of the puzzle. FOXP2 is a regulator. It helps orchestrate the development of the brain circuits and the fine motor control needed for speech. When this gene is damaged in humans, it causes severe speech and language disorders. We share a version of FOXP2 with chimpanzees and mice, but the human version has two tiny, critical mutations, changes in its chemical structure, that happened sometime after we split from our common ancestor with chimps. By comparing the gene across species, scientists can estimate when those crucial mutations arose. The best estimates point to a window much earlier than anyone staring at Nariokotome boy's bones would have guessed, possibly as far back as 1.5 million years ago. Suddenly, the timeline is thrown into chaos. The genetic blueprint for the neural machinery of speech may have been in place in Homo erectus, striding across the savanna, while his throat, according to the bone evidence, was still supposedly silent. It's a biological contradiction, a brain and a body out of sync. This is where the old model breaks. Perhaps we've been asking the wrong question. We've been looking for the anatomy of modern speech. But what if language didn't begin with a perfect modern sentence? What if it started in the body, long before the throat could shape a clear word? To find that origin, you have to leave the lab and step into a world where every shadow held teeth, where the cold could kill you by morning, and where your only safety was the small band of others huddled beside you. A world where survival didn't just favor the strong, it favored the connected. Picture a band of Homo heidelbergensis, ancestors to both us and Neanderthals, camped in a shallow cave in Europe 400,000 years ago. The Ice Age wind howls outside, a razor-edge cold that steals heat from your core with every breath. Around a smoldering fire, the group of 25 or 30 people huddle. Their faces are lit by flickering orange light. They are eating, tearing meat from the bones of a red deer they hunted that day. Their world is a symphony of immediate sensation. The ache of cold feet, the taste of fat, the heavy scent of smoke and hide. In this world, a sound is not just a sound. A sudden crack in the woods is not a branch. It is danger. The lowing of a herd in the distance is not noise. It is food. A cry from a member of the group is not a yell. It is help. They cannot say there's a lion in the thicket to the east. But they don't need to. If one member, the one on watch, sees a tawny shape slinking in the grass, their body will react before their mind even forms a thought. Their breath catches. Their eyes widen. Their muscles tense. And from their throat erupts a sound. A sharp, guttural asterisk, KHHH. Asterisk, a sound wired directly from fear to larynx. Every head in the camp snaps toward the sound. They don't need a word for lion. They don't need a word for east. The sound itself, its tone, its urgency, its direction, it carries the meaning. Here, now, threat. They grab their spears. They close ranks. The children are pulled inward. The communication is complete, and it has saved their lives. This is the bedrock beneath language, shared attention and shared intent. It's the primal conversation. One person signals, the others infer the meaning and respond. For millions of years, our ancestors communicated like this, with a rich repertoire of grunts, gestures, and facial expressions. A chimp does this. A gorilla does this. It's powerful, but it is trapped in the present tense, in the immediate here and now. It can point to the thing that is seen or felt, but not to the thing that is remembered or imagined or planned for tomorrow. The leap to language is the leap from pointing at the lion to being able to say, asterisk, remember where the lion was yesterday? We should avoid that valley. Asterisk, it's the leap from sharing an emotion to sharing an idea. And for the longest time, the prevailing theory was that this leap required a final, magical upgrade. The modern brain, that the prefrontal cortex had to bloom, creating a kind of language module that suddenly made grammar possible. That it happened in a blink of evolutionary time. A great leap forward around 70,000 years ago. But the evidence started to rebel against this neat story. Archaeologists began finding things that didn't fit. Sophisticated glue recipes requiring controlled fire. Ocean voyages to islands that must have required planning. Ritual burial of the dead with grave goods. And these weren't always the work of Homo sapiens. Some of them bore the fingerprints of other, older humans. Which forces a haunting, beautiful question. If they were thinking in ways that seemed to require complex communication, what were they saying to each other? And how were they saying it, when their bones tell us they couldn't? The answer may lie not in a sudden revolution, but in a slow, desperate, and deeply physical collaboration. It may have begun not with poetry, but with a problem so ordinary, so daily, so brutally essential that solving it quietly rewired the way our ancestors thought. It started with their hands, and with what they held in them. The problem was stone. To survive, they needed to turn that rock into a tool, a sharp flake. To cut hide, a pointed spear tip to bring down prey. This is not instinct. A chimpanzee can use a found rock. It cannot make a new, specific shape from one. To look at a blank stone and see the hidden blade inside. To strike it at exactly the right angle with exactly the right force to release that blade. That is a geometric puzzle solved with kinetic intelligence. It is a conversation between the mind, the eye, and the hand. For 2 million years, the technology was static. The Oldowan tool, a simple, sharp flake knocked off a core. Useful, but limited. Then, around 1.7 million years ago, something changed. The Acheulean hand axe appears. It is a breathtaking object, symmetrical, teardrop-shaped, bifacially flaked. It required a mental template. The maker had to hold a finished shape in their mind's eye across hundreds of strikes, turning the core again and again, each blow preparing for the next. It is evidence of a silent, internal instruction manual. Now, try to teach that to someone else without words. You are a skilled maker, sitting by a creek with a novice, perhaps your child. You have the core stone. You have the hammer stone. You must communicate the angle of strike, the rotation of the core, the shift in force when you near the edge, the moment to stop before you shatter it. You cannot say 30 degrees, or softer now, or imagine a teardrop. So you move your hands. You demonstrate, slowly. You place your hands over theirs and guide the strike. You point to the spot to hit. You make a sound, a sharp exhale for strike, a hum for good, a grunt for stop. The lesson is a slow, painful, iterative loop of action, correction, and shared attention. It can take months, but it works. These hand axes spread across 3 continents. Their form persistent over 1 million years. A tradition was being passed down, generation to generation, through a grammar of gesture, gaze, and sound. This was the cradle of syntax. Because to sequence a complex action, to teach, first do this, then that, but only if this other thing is true, is to use the logic of language before you have the words for it. The neural pathways that plan and execute a multi-step toolmaking process are the same pathways that will later arrange words into a sentence. The brain was practicing for speech with its hands, but stone tools were just the beginning of the collaboration. The real crisis, the daily emergency that may have forced the mind to share its inner world, was not in the hands. It was in the body, and in the coming dark. Nightfall was a swallowing terror. The temperature plummets. The landscape, vanishes into a wall of black. Every rustle is amplified. This is when the predators you escaped by day become the hunters. Your band is most vulnerable when you are static, when you are asleep. You must secure the camp. You must coordinate the watch. You must decide who sleeps near the fire, who gets the furs. You must do this every single evening, with light fading, with fatigue dragging at your limbs, with children crying from hunger, and you have no words for shift, perimeter, or relief. So you develop a protocol, a series of gestures, touches, and symbolic objects. The person who will take first watch is handed a specific spear. They touch the shoulder of the person they will replace. They point to a rock on the eastern edge. This is not just communication. It is a contract about the future. You, here, later, me. It is a plan, enacted through shared ritual. It requires every member to understand, not just the immediate action, but a future intention and a social role. Now, scale this problem up. The meat from that red deer will spoil. The band must process it, butcher it, dry it, share it. Who gets the organ meats rich in vitamins? Who gets the tough sinew for binding? The strong hunter who made the kill? The elder whose knowledge of the land guided them? The pregnant woman who cannot hunt but needs the iron? The distribution of food is the foundation of social survival. It requires memory, he hunted last time. Value, her knowledge is crucial. And expectation, she will share later. To manage this without language, you need something more powerful than grunts. You need symbols. And here, in the archaeological record, we find the first whispers of them, not in words, but in objects that seem to carry meaning beyond their function. Pigments. Ochre, a red iron oxide, appears at sites across Africa and beyond, dating back over 300,000 years. It is often found ground into powder, mixed with fat, worn down from repeated use. For a century, we assumed it was just for decoration. Body paint, aesthetics. But the brain does not invest precious calories and effort in mere decoration. When survival is balanced on a knife's edge, ochre is practical. It is a preservative, tanning hides. It is an insect repellent, protecting skin. It is a medicine, sealing wounds. But the act of marking something, a hide, a tool, a face, transforms it. It says, asterisk, this is different. This is mine. This is ours. This is sacred. When you smear a red stripe on a water container, you are no longer just treating leather. You are labeling it. You are creating a category in the physical world that everyone in the band can see and understand. The symbol is born from utility, but it blooms into a shared reference. That container is now the red one for the gathering trip, the night watch, the food sharing, the marking of territory and objects. All of it demanded a way to store information outside the brain, to coordinate plans beyond the immediate moment, to assign roles and remember debts. The brain, wired for survival, was frantically searching for a better system. And it found it in the one piece of hardware that was already there, already networked and infinitely adaptable: the voice. But not the voice for speech as we know it. Not yet. Imagine the constraints. Their larynx is still high, their vocal tract simple. They cannot form our vowels, but they have exquisite control over rhythm, pitch, and melody. They can hum, they can chant, they can modulate a single syllable across a range of meanings. This is where the counterintuitive twist emerges from the unlikeliest of places: the analysis of infant development and the communication of other apes. Before babies speak words, they sing. They experiment with melodic contours, rising and falling tones that express demand, question, comfort. This is called proto-language. It is not words with definitions, but sounds with intonational meaning. Our ancestors, trapped in a body not yet fully shaped for speech, likely did the same. A rising hum might mean a question, a check-in. Are you there? A low, repetitive chant might coordinate a rhythm for pounding nuts or paddling a raft. A specific melodic call might mean gather here versus danger, scatter. The evidence is etched not in stone, but in the very architecture of our language. The most ancient, universal elements of human communication are not nouns or verbs first. They are the musical cues: tone of voice, rhythm, the pause that builds expectation. The way a single sound, like huh, can be an universal interrogative across every language studied, precisely because it is a melodic, breathy contour, not a word. They were building a lexicon of melody. And then, perhaps, came the breakthrough that tied it all together. It wasn't a new sound. It was a new pairing. The fusion of a specific melodic contour with a specific, repeatable gesture. A person points at the setting sun, then makes a low, descending hum and gestures toward the cave. Sunday down, cave. The gesture grounds the meaning in the visible world. The melody carries the emotional and intentional frame, a directive. Another person points at a tree, makes a rising tone, and mimes eating. Tree. Question. Food. The combination is infinitely generative. A limited set of melodies and a set of gestures could create a vast array of meanings. A combinatorial system. This is the ghost we have been chasing. This is what the genes like FOXP2 were fortifying. Not the machinery for cat and run, but the neural circuitry for precise motor control, for sequencing, for linking sound to meaning, in a flexible, rule-governed way. They weren't talking about philosophy. They were using a tonal, gestural code to solve the brutal, daily maths of survival. Where, when, who, how. The fossil record will never show us that moment, but it leaves us with one profound, haunting clue that this was real. It is found not in a grand cave, but in Cima de los Huesos, the pit of bones, in Atapuerca, Spain. Here, 430,000 years ago, deep before Homo sapiens, a group of Homo heidelbergensis deliberately placed the bodies of at least 28 of their dead down a vertical shaft. This was not a casual disposal. This was a repeated, perilous act, descending into the dark, placing bodies in a specific location, leaving them with a single, exquisite hand axe made of rose quartz, a material of no practical use, a crystal-clear symbol. They could not say the word afterlife. They could not articulate a belief. But they shared an idea, so powerful it overrode the instinct for self-preservation. They coordinated an action that served no immediate physical need. They were communicating about the unseen, the abstract, the sacred. They were speaking, not with our words, but with a language of gesture, melody, and shared purpose. So effective it crossed the threshold of the impossible. It turned a species of clever apes into beings who could agree, across generations, that some things, like the fate of a soul, or the shape of a perfect tear in stone, mattered more than the daily grind of survival. And in that silent agreement, held in a dark pit with a rose-colored axe, the world of the mind finally broke its solitary confinement. A thought could now outlive the thinker. But that single, luminous hand axe in the dark asked a dangerous question. If this silent language of gesture and tone was so powerful, why did it ever change? Why did we risk choking on our food? To drop the larynx and narrow the throat into a precise instrument, a system that could coordinate a funeral, teach toolmaking, and plan a hunt was clearly enough to survive. Evolution does not spend energy on frivolous upgrades. Something must have broken, or rather, something must have been missing that became a matter of life and death. The limitation was in the dark, and in the hands that worked there. You feel it when you try to tie a knot behind your back, or describe a spiral staircase using only gestures. Some concepts are trapped by line of sight. You can point to a lion in the grass, but you cannot point to the lion that was here yesterday or the lion that might come tomorrow. You can show someone how to hold a hammerstone, but you cannot explain why this quarry's flint is better than that one, because the why is invisible. It's a memory of past failures, a prediction of future fractures. The gestural lexicon was a language of the immediate, the concrete, the here and then. The climate broke. Around 400,000 years ago, the cycles of ice ages intensified. Homo heidelbergensis bands in Europe and Asia were pushed to the absolute edge. The herds they depended on migrated unpredictably. Safe caves were frozen over. Familiar fruit trees vanished. Survival now depended on navigating landscapes you couldn't see, recalling resources from seasons past, and plotting routes across territories where no one could point because no one had been there yet. The brain was overflowing with vital, invisible information it had no way to export. The pressure found its most acute point not in hunting, but in the most humble, daily technology. Fire. Fire was life. It was warmth, protection, light, a way to cook food and detoxify plants. But fire is a living, dying thing. It must be tended, fed, carried. And starting a fire from scratch in a damp, Ice Age landscape is a week's work of desperate friction. So you keep it alive. You appoint a firekeeper. Their sole task, their sacred duty, is to ensure the ember never dies. Now, imagine that firekeeper is dying. An infection, an injury. Their strength is fading with the light. The ember is low. They are surrounded by the band, faces anxious in the flicker. They have to transfer an universe of invisible knowledge. Which moss holds a spark best when it's damp? How to blow to coax flame without killing it? The exact smell of the wood. That makes the safest, slowest burning coal. The way to bank the ashes so it survives a night of sleet. They cannot demonstrate with a dying breath. They cannot point to memories no one else has. Their hands are too weak to gesture the subtle, internal feel of the right breath pressure. The entire survival of the band, their warmth, their cooked food, their nighttime shield from predators, is locked inside a single failing mind. And the old system of show and grunt is utterly, catastrophically insufficient. This is the crisis that may have forced the final turn. When the cost of not sharing an invisible idea became extinction, the brain, already primed by melodic contours and gestures, needed a new kind of symbol. One that could be detached from the here and now. One that could stand for the smell of the right wood, or the concept of tomorrow's valley. It needed the arbitrary sign, and your body already had the perfect, underused instrument for inventing one: your breath. Consider a gesture. To mean fire, you might hold your hands out, miming warmth. But that mime is tied to the concept of heat. It can't easily mean the fire from 3 days ago, or the potential for fire. It's iconic. Now consider a sound. A raspy, crackling exhale. KKKKHHH. That sound is arbitrary. It doesn't look like fire. But if everyone in the band agrees that this specific sound, this particular texture of breath and tongue, stands for the fire, its keeper, its fuel, its danger, then something magical happens. The concept is freed. You can now combine that sound with a descending melody to mean, the fire is dying, or with a questioning lilt to ask, where is the firewood? The arbitrary sound is a vault. It can hold anything. The best evidence for this shift isn't a tool, it's a soundscape. Researchers modeling the acoustic properties of ancient landscapes have noticed something profound. The places our ancestors returned to again and again, certain river valleys, cave mouths, foraging grounds, weren't just visually distinct. They had unique sonic fingerprints. The way wind whistled through a particular rock formation, the specific echo of a call in a canyon, the pattern of water over stones. These were natural, consistent audio signatures. A band could agree. That wind howl means the Bison Pass. This water rush means safe crossing. The sound of the place itself becomes its name. And once you have a name, you can take it with you. You can make the sound away from the place and conjure it in the minds of others. You have created a portable, shared memory. The world of the invisible, the remembered, the anticipated, is now stitched into the fabric of your communication. But the body still resisted. The high larynx couldn't produce the clean, distinct sounds needed for a large vocabulary of these arbitrary signs. You need contrast between sounds to keep them apart. KHH for fire and GHH for gully might blur together in a noisy wind. The selective pressure now became ferociously specific. Survival favored those who could produce a wider, clearer range of these arbitrary, contrastive sounds, and so the anatomy began to bend. Not in one dramatic mutation, but in a slow, generational creep. The larynx lowered, millimeter by millimeter, lengthening the vocal tract. The muscles of the tongue and lips gained finer control. This wasn't for singing better, it was for encoding better. It was for turning the voice into a precision instrument for symbol making. The risk of choking was a horrific price, but the payoff was the ability to save your children by telling them where the water was, long before they ever saw the river. The proof of this transition is written in the trash. At a 300,000-year-old site in Skåningen, Germany, Homo heidelbergensis left behind something extraordinary: meticulously crafted, aerodynamic wooden spears. These are not sharpened sticks. They are balanced throwing weapons, each requiring a different type of wood for the shaft and the point, carefully jointed and fire-hardened. Making one is a multi-day project involving selection, shaping, treatment, and assembly, a sequence of steps for an object whose use is entirely in the future. This is the logic of language carved into spruce. It screams of planning, of terms for flexible and hard and straight, of verbs for shave and rotate and harden. But the most telling clue of all comes from the dead themselves. We've seen the symbolic burial at Cima de los Huesos, but later, in Neanderthal sites from just 100,000 years ago, we find something more intimate. An old man, buried in Shanidar Cave in Iraq. His skeleton shows a lifetime of brutal injury: a withered arm, a blind eye, a crippling leg wound. He could not hunt. He could not forage with the group. Yet he lived for years, perhaps decades, after these injuries. His survival was a mathematical impossibility. Without explicit, deliberate, and sustained care, someone had to explain his needs to others. Someone had to coordinate bringing him food and water. Someone had to assign value to a life that gave no immediate physical return to the band. This isn't just compassion. This is a narrative. It requires concepts like because, although, and therefore. He is slow, therefore we must walk slower. He cannot see on his left, therefore you must stand on his right. He taught us, therefore we provide. That logic is the deep structure of grammar. It is the syntax of care. And so, by the time the first anatomically modern Homo sapiens walked in Africa, around 300,000 years ago, the stage was already set. The brain was wired for complex sequences and arbitrary symbols. The voice, while not fully modern, was descending towards clarity. The social world was dense with shared meanings that needed more efficient expression. We didn't invent language from scratch. We inherited a half-finished symphony of gesture, melody, and communal survival, and we simply gave it a sharper, more efficient instrument. The final twist, the one that allowed our particular branch to explode across the globe, may have been a small neurological tweak to something called procedural learning. It's the difference between knowing how to make a hand axe and being able to rapidly recombine those steps into new patterns. It's what lets a child, exposed to a jumble of words, unconsciously deduce the rules of grammar without being taught. It is cognitive fluidity. When that fluidity met the descending larynx and the ancient, melodic proto-language, the dam broke. The arbitrary sounds could now be combined not just in pairs, but in chains, following internal rules. A story could be told. A warning could be precise. A plan could be debated. The ghost in the bones finally had a clear, unmistakable voice. You can hear its echo every time you swallow, and feel the slight, vulnerable hollow at the base of your throat. That is the monument. That is the healed wound of a risk your ancestors took in the dark, so that a thought like this one could travel across 400,000 years, from a dying firekeeper's desperate breath to the silent words forming in your mind right now.